Hey all, Dave here. Today's video is kind of a follow-on from my discussion with the amazing Claire View on her channel yesterday. If you haven't checked out Claire, then you really should. She runs one of the best channels on YouTube with a wide range of content. Our discussion yesterday was about the philosophy of power, and this video is intended to be an extension of that discussion. We'll begin with Max Weber and move through various different ideas about what power is and how it is exercised in social relationships. We're starting with Weber not because he was the first person to speak about power. Discussions of power go back far in the history of philosophy. We're beginning with Weber because he gave one of the most influential accounts of power in modern social and political thought. Something that I hope you'll see by the end of the video is that there is no one-size-fits-all kind of power. Instead, it's something complex and has many different dimensions. We'll also be talking about the Truman Show, just to make sure things don't get too dry and boring. But, fair warning, there may be some spoilers going on. If you don't want it spoiled, then I suggest watching the film first. It's worth it just to experience the film. So, what does Weber say about power? The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy describes Max Weber as arguably the foremost social theorist of the 20th century. In his work, Economy and Society, an outline of interpretive sociology, he gives a definition of power that most of us will recognize. Weber describes power, using the German term Macht, as the probability that one actor within a social relationship will be in a position to carry out his own will despite resistance. As you can probably tell, this is talking about power within social relationships, and only makes sense in light of that setting. So we're talking about power as it exists in social relationships here. We can also see that there is an element of resistance included in his definition. It's not just that one person can carry out their will, it's that they can do it even when met with resistance. That's important to remember as we move through our discussion about different kinds of power. At first glance, it sounds like we're talking about power exercised through force, someone imposing their will despite opposition. And that's the kind of power we may often think of first, like the bully demanding another kid's lunch money.
Lunch money.
Or a dictator like Kim Jong-un exercising control over his population. This is the kind of power we see playing out within social relationships all over the world, especially where there is conflict, opposition, and resistance. However, as we make our way through, you'll hopefully see that it's just one way of understanding power. Our next stop during our brief tour of power is with Robert Dahl and his 1957 paper, The Concept of Power. Here we find a conception of power that is very similar to the one we saw in Weber. In his paper, Dahl defines power as A has power over B to the extent that he can get B to do something that B would not do otherwise. As can be seen, there is some overlap between Weber and Dahl. Both are talking about relationships between actors and their ability to get others to do something. Just as Weber's definition reminds us of something like the schoolyard bully, so too does Dahl's. In this case, the bully has power over the other child to the extent that the bully can get the other child to give up their lunch money, when they otherwise wouldn't. What's missing in Dahl's version is the idea of conflict and resistance. However, while Dahl's definition doesn't directly include it, neither does it mean it is excluded. Something that we focused on so far is the relationship between individuals. You'll probably have noticed that Weber's definition used the term actor, and I described Dahl's definition as also being about actors. Not only is actors the correct sociological term, but it is used because power is not just about interpersonal relationship. I wouldn't blame you for interpreting the definitions as being about interpersonal relationships, as it's kind of intuitive to think of power in that way. However, actors also refer to things like groups and institutions. So a government has power over its people to the extent that it can get them to do things they would otherwise not do, or despite resistance, depending on which definition we're speaking of here. This will become important later when we begin discussing other dimensions of power. Remember at the beginning of the video when I said that I would try to bring in some Truman Show references to stop this being too dry? If you think back to the film, when Truman is trying to escape the town, Christof uses the environment against Truman.
How do we stop him? Okay, we're going to be accessing the weather program now, so hold on to your hats. You got that? No, I think we're going to want to localize a storm over the boat.
This is Christof using his power to maintain the status quo despite Truman's resistance, giving us an example of Weber's definition. As an example of Dahl's definition, we see Christof using the other actors in Sea Haven, like the travel agent, to nudge Truman and keep him contained in the town without him even knowing he's being contained.
I'm sorry to keep you.
Oh, that's okay.
How can I help?
I would like to book a flight to Fiji.
When would you like to leave?
Today.
I'm sorry, I don't have anything for at least a month.
Before we move on to the next idea in our brief tour of power, it's important to note here that Weber and Dahl are both talking about observable power. They are both attempting to map their theories onto what we can observe about how power is exercised in our social structures. In Dahl's case, his paper even gives us a formula for calculating who has the power and how much power they have in any relationship. I won't spend time explaining that here, as it isn't really needed to understand how Dahl is talking about power. However, if you want me to explain it in a separate video, then feel free to leave me a comment below and I'll do my best to break it down. Why is it important to understand that Weber and Dahl are both talking about publicly visible displays of power? Well, we are about to strip off the wallpaper of power and begin examining the structures underneath it. We'll start by looking at Bachrach and Baratz's Two Faces of Power. I know, the title sounds like we're about to start talking about an important album from a lounge band rather than a philosophy paper. However, it's actually one of the most influential works ever written about power. To give you some idea of its impact and importance, Frank Fisher said in 2008 that it was the most cited article in political science. In their paper, Bachrach and Baratz argue that the visible part of power only shows us one face of power. There is also another face of power that is harder to see and exists under the surface, which is the power to control the conversation, so to speak. By power to control the conversation, I mean something more than simply dominating a conversation or being the loudest voice in the room. Bachrach and Baratz are talking about something a little more subtle than that. Let's go back to the Truman Show here for a moment. Christof's plan is to ensure that Truman never sees behind the illusion. There are people on the outside of Sea Haven that are against what is happening to Truman and desire to wake him from the illusion.
They're here. Truman,
What do they want?
listen to me. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows everything you do. They're pretending, Truman. Do you understand? Everybody's pretending.
I don't know.
No. My name's not Lauren. It's Sylvia. My name's Sylvia. Yeah.
Lauren, sweetheart, not again.
Hey, wait a minute. Who are you?
I'm her father.
What?
I've never even
Come on,
seen you
sweetie.
before.
doing it.
Please, honey.
He's lying.
Honey, please.
Truman, please.
No,
Don't listen
no.
to him. Everything
going
I've
on?
told you is the truth.
Please.
This. It's fake. It's all for you.
I don't
And the
understand.
sky and the
What?
sea, everything. It's a set.
I don't
It's a
play.
show. Everybody's
You'll be all
watching
right.
you. Please don't
Please,
listen to him.
Laura.
He's gonna lie to you. Watching us
going
right
on?
now.
I really would like to know what's
Schizophrenia.
going on.
She has episodes.
Please. What?
We tried everything. Hypnotism,
No,
everything.
don't
Shock
listen to him,
therapy.
Truman.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Truman.
You're not the first.
Occasionally, they make their way in and are immediately removed so as not to be part of Truman's life. Christof also vets anyone going into Sea Haven and makes sure that all the actors in the show are dedicated to keeping the illusion going for fear of losing their job or just never being hired in the first place. Christof uses his power as creator and director to ensure that all conversations are directed toward keeping Truman in the illusion, and all people within that system follow his plan. This is the overlooked face of power that Bachrach and Baratz are talking about in their paper. It is the power to shape what gets talked about in the first place. Let's highlight the differences a little more between the three accounts of power we've spoken about so far. With Weber, Truman tries to escape the illusion set up for him by Christof, and Christof uses force and control to try to stop Truman from escaping. With Dahl, Christof gets people to act in ways Truman would not want if Truman knew the truth about his life. Bachrach and Baratz, however, highlight the idea that Christof controls the conditions under which Truman forms his beliefs and makes choices. Of course, the real world rarely works as perfectly as Christof's exercise of power here. Institutions, agendas, cultural assumptions, and the like all behave a little more subtly in the real world. However, I'm using the Truman Show as an illustration of these ideas, not as a complete analogy. I'm using it because it's a useful illustration, not because it can be perfectly transferred into the real world. We've now looked at what Bachrach and Baratz called two faces of power, but let's change the term for them slightly. Let's call them dimensions of power instead, and introduce a third dimension to power. This third dimension comes to us from Stephen Lukes and his seminal 1974 work titled Power, A Radical View. In this work, Lukes accepts and builds on Bachrach and Baratz's account of power, but argues that it does not break enough from Dahl's account of power. Lukes argues that Bachrach and Baratz still remains situated in a framework of conflict, like Weber and Dahl. While the conflict involved in the two faces of power is a silent conflict, Lukes argues that there is a third dimension that does not involve conflict at all. Lukes argues that there is another way that power is exercised, and that is through the shaping of what are described as subjective and real preferences. In order to make this more explicit, power is here defined as A exercises power over B when A affects B in a manner contrary to B's interests. Let's take this back to Truman for a moment. Consider Truman's life before he discovered that he was living in an illusion. During that period, Christof had shaped his understanding of the world so successfully that Truman did not even realize there was an illusion to escape from. His preferences had been shaped and formed by the world that Christof had created for him.
As Truman grew up, we were forced to manufacture ways to keep him on the island.
I'd like to be an explorer, like the Great Magellan.
Oh, you're too late. There's really nothing left to explore.
However, once that illusion began to break down, Truman's real preferences began to make their way through. The preference that emerges is that Truman wants to leave Sea Haven. His interest wasn't really in living an illusion. Christof's power lay in preventing Truman's real preferences from ever emerging in the first place. One important thing to understand about Lukes is that he's not talking about anything like brainwashing. It's something much more subtle than that. Lukes is talking about a different kind of conditioning, the social shaping of preferences. It is about shaping the world in such a way that an individual or group's preferences may stop their real preferences from ever emerging. Think of life in the past. where women simply accepted the power that men had over them. They were raised to believe that men knew best, and that men were suited for the workplace and power. It was a woman's job to raise children and tend to the household, not take part in political activities and shape the future of society. Luke's would argue that this caused women to act against their real interests, and as society changed, women's real interests emerged. We've now made our way through 3 dimensions of power, moving from Weber through to Luke's. From power as overt force, to power as controlling the agenda, to power as ideological shaping. All 3 of these can be grouped into the idea of power over another individual or group. However, power over is just one perspective of power, just as power as overt force is just one dimension of power. There are also the ideas of power with and power to, both of which are discussed in Amy Allen's Rethinking Power from 1998. Let's take a look at these other 2 approaches to power next. In her paper, Allen gives us a definition of power over, power to, and power with. We won't revisit the entire idea of power over here, but for the sake of completeness, I will give her definition of it. Allen describes power over as the ability of an actor or set of actors to constrain the choices available to another actor or set of actors in a non-trivial way. As we can see, this is another account of what we have been calling power over. One thing to understand about Allen's work is that it is situated in feminist philosophy and focuses on the domination and empowerment of women. This means that her discussion of power is primarily concerned with the kinds of domination that men have historically exercised over women. However, just because Allen talks about power in these terms, that doesn't mean the concepts can't be applied in a broader sense. So, what does she tell us about power to? Power to, Allen says, can best be understood in terms of empowerment and resistance. As she states in her paper, these cannot be understood in terms of power over. Rather, they talk about the actor in terms of their ability to act in spite of or in response to the power wielded over them by others. That's why she defines power to as the ability of an individual actor to attain an end or series of ends. We can see how this differs from power over quite clearly here. It's not about asserting control over another, it is about a person asserting control over their own lives and goals. Allen describes power to and empowerment as roughly synonymous, though separates it from simple resistance. Empowerment, or power to, can be a response to a system of domination, but it does not necessarily involve resistance. Resistance is instead a particular application of power to. As I mentioned earlier, Allen also gives us the idea of power with. It's kind of intuitive to think that power with is simply an expansion of power to into a collective. However, while power with can be considered as a group working together to achieve empowerment, that doesn't quite capture it. Hannah Arendt, someone we will look at in more depth later on, defines power as the human ability not just to act, but to act in concert. This is kind of how Allen is thinking of power with here. The definition that Allen gives for power with is the ability of a collectivity to act together for the attainment of a common or shared end or series of ends. She reminds us in her paper, though, that solidarity and power with shouldn't be thought of in equal terms. While solidarity can be considered a form of power with, it doesn't exhaust all the possibilities of power with. Like she points out, a military that imposes martial law unjustly and exercises their power over a population can be considered to have power with. The members of the military are working together to toward a shared objective. It's their collective ability, even if the objective is an unjust one, that illustrates what Alan means here by power with. Let's bring in a couple of examples here just to help solidify our understanding of these ideas. I'll skip using an example of the idea of power over because we've already seen plenty throughout the video. I've got no doubts in my mind that you can come up with your own examples of Alan's definition of power over, and can even apply it to the examples I gave previously. There is, of course, one very obvious example of power to from the Truman Show. During the course of the film, we see Truman trying to leave the island to explore the wider world, like attempting to book a holiday through the travel agent. However, each time his plans are thwarted by Christof's control over Truman's environment. Once the illusion breaks down though, and Christof can no longer control Truman through these various means, we see Truman exercise his own ability to pursue his goal of escaping from Sea Haven. That is Truman finally gaining his empowerment, or power 2.
In case I don't see ya. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Well, I'm gonna move away from the Truman Show for this, and use an example from my life. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this discussion on power was created to supplement a chat that I had on Claire's YouTube channel. Another project that I was involved with on Claire's channel was an audiobook version of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Claire was kind enough to invite me to participate in that project, and from there a group of creators worked together toward the shared goal of producing the audiobook. This could be considered an example of power with. It was all of us working together toward the shared goal of producing the audiobook. We have also all worked together again to create an audiobook version of So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. If you're a fan of either book, then I highly recommend going and checking those projects out. I'll leave a link to both playlists in the description of this video. So where do we head next on our brief tour of power? Well, for now, we're going to hit pause on this brief tour. Don't worry, this isn't the end of the tour. There is still much more to come, which is the reason we're hitting pause here. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that we will be covering Hannah Arendt later on, and that is where our next stop will be. However, there is a lot to cover where Arendt is concerned. Not only that, but it's something of a conceptual shift compared to what we looked at here. So it feels like a natural stopping point to allow you to sit with the concepts that were introduced in this video. We've covered quite a lot here, from Weber's idea of power as being the ability to impose your will despite resistance, through to Dahl, Bachrach and Baratz, Luke's, and Alan's different perspectives on power. We've seen how power isn't always just the application of force, and doesn't necessarily even involve resistance. Sometimes it's having our environment shaped for us, and sometimes it's us being empowered by controlling our own destiny, and other times it's working together to achieve a shared goal. Hopefully you've seen that there's no one-size-fits-all where power is concerned. It's a complicated thing that appears in many different ways in our lives. There are still lots of important questions and ideas left unspoken and unanswered in this video though. Like what happens when power isn't something that one person exercises over another, but it's something woven into the structures, institutions, and practices of society. Or how power shapes the way that we understand knowledge, normality, or even ourselves. This is where a thinker like Michel Foucault takes us. But Foucault isn't the only thinker who challenges our understanding of power. Hannah Arendt asks us whether we have misunderstood power by focusing too much on force and domination. Could power instead actually be something that exists through collective action? This is the next stop on our brief tour through power, and what we will discuss in the next video. For now though, we'll hit pause and take a break. If you enjoyed this part, don't forget to give it a like and share. It really helps out a small channel like mine a lot, as does a subscribe. And don't forget to check out my chat with Claire. I'll leave a link in the description. If you want to help support my work even further, then I have a link to both my Patreon and Ko-fi in the description too. I'm always grateful for any support, and my work is usually available much earlier on my Patreon compared to YouTube. Until next time, take care, and I hope life treats you well. See you soon. Bye.